say from sunny California, but it's raining here today, but we need the water, so it's all good. The video you're going to see stems from when I worked at Stanford University and co-developed the Human Behavioral Threat Assessment program there. Just put yourself in the, in this case, the employee's shoes. Professor Enrique Chacoya, a world-renowned artist. Can you imagine being alerted that this video was posted about you on YouTube? So go ahead and start the video when you can. Okay, good. So let's go ahead and get into the topic this morning. First of all, thank you for everybody for giving me some time to speak on what I feel is a very important topic, and it really has to do with organizational safety and security, not just hospitals, but for the purposes of this morning, we're going to focus on hospital security and what I term the menu approach to human behavioral threat assessment. I'll set up a little bit more on this video later, and I'll talk about it additionally. But Professor Enrique Chacoya, like I said, art professor at Stanford University, what he had done is, and some of you may remember it, had drawn some artwork depicting Jesus in a sexual act, and that piece of artwork was posted in Loveland, Colorado. By the way, I will note that some 4 years later, that video, despite efforts to have it removed from YouTube, is still present, as you can see. And Kathleen Folden, truck driver out of Montana, went to Loveland, Colorado. You may recall this, went into the art gallery, took a crowbar and destroyed it. Many people felt she was a hero in doing that. We can all form our own thoughts on that. But the fact of the matter is, Professor Chacoya received in excess of 600 emails, all of them threatening, within a 24-hour period. I was assigned to work with him and develop some security safety strategies, not only for him, his family, his home, and the Stanford community as well. I could tell you and share with you that many of those emails were signed. In doing some research, they were signed by what I would describe as vice presidents of corporations. They had no problem, educated people had no problem signing their name to it. And some of the threats were quite graphic and very disturbing. So that kind of gets us rolling, stimulates some thought. And let's go ahead and get into the presentation. A little bit about myself. I am a security director for North Bay Healthcare. We're a 150-bed healthcare facility spread out over 13 miles between 2 hospitals and 13 outlying medical office buildings. We're located in 2 communities, one in Fairfield, California, the other one being Vacaville, California. Those who are familiar with what happens on the West Coast know that Oakland, as an example, my hometown, has a reputation for violence, and there's some segments of the Fairfield community that has that as well. We're located geographically in a neighborhood where there is heavy gang influence. Unfortunately, we do experience shootings across the street from the facility. Most recently, we had a patient that was coming in and was robbed in our parking lot. So there's a lot of violence that takes place, and we're going to delve into what is taking place as far as trends go in hospitals. I have over 34 years of law enforcement, security, and emergency preparedness experience. I was very fortunate in my law enforcement career to attend the FBI National Academy, West Point Leadership, Command College, and then most importantly for this morning's topic, I attended, sponsored by UCLA, the Gavin DeBecker Human Behavioral Threat Assessment Program and the Waiver 21 program put on by Dr. White and Dr. Malloy. And I went through those programs 3 years ago and have been doing human behavioral threat assessment since. And as I noted, I've developed the behavioral threat assessment program here in my current organization and was co-developer at Stanford. So let's start globally, and then we'll drill down to what's taking place, and in some respects bring it close to home, unfortunately. But the fact of the matter is, from my perspective, there are individuals in the United States intent on attacking our institutions. We'll recognize all these pictures. Let's start with schools first. You'll see there that 60 incidences were reported regarding school shootings in the first 80 years that this began to be tracked. And then in the last 28 years, we can see the jump there. And that's a trend. We all know that. We all recognize that. 229 incidences in the last 28 years, and you can see the casualties associated with what is taking place in our schools. The simple metaphor for all of this, from my perspective, is that 4 or 5 years ago, we used to talk about an incident and review it once a month. Then it went down to every other week, and unfortunately it's down to every week now. And I'm not talking solely about schools, but in general, where something is happening in our country. Government, we all remember, or we should remember, but sometimes we have a tendency to forget because headlines are wiped away quickly. Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords, I think we remember that. That individual on the left, Mr. Loeffner, we remember that very telling booking photo of him when he shot the congresswoman in Arizona. Very sad situation. Fort Hood has been victimized twice. In 2009, Nadel Hassan shot 13. For those who may not be familiar with that situation, he was actually a psychologist responsible for treating soldiers with post-traumatic stress syndrome. So many times with these incidences, this serves as the perfect example. We have a tendency to want to look outside the organization for the threat that may come our way. But in reality, many times, it is our coworker. Sadly, it is somebody that we work with that is going to have access to the organization, or it's a significant other of a coworker that perhaps takes their electronic access card and uses it to gain entry into the organization. In the private sector, you'll note on bullet number 1, I put that there for a reason. That was really a benchmark event that happened in San Francisco, number 1 California Street. Again, a lot of these are emotion-based crimes. He was a failed entrepreneur. But this goes back to 1993, and I'm going to show you some other information shortly that will let us know that this has been around for a long time. Close to geographically your area there, in 2007, the Westroads Mall in Omaha, that resulted in 8 fatalities. That individual, as I understand it in studying that situation, had been hospitalized twice for emotional distress. There was an incident that occurred in a hospital, for example, where the patient went through surgery in 2001, returned 10 years later. There's no way to plan for that. There's no way to defend that. Returned 10 years later because he thought that during surgery they had implanted a monitoring device on him, and he came back to that facility and unfortunately brought a firearm with him. 2009 LA Fitness, Bridgevale, Pennsylvania, 3 killed, 9 injured. This is a common theme from people who are intent on doing this. He felt rejected by women. Most often this is a control crime or the simple philosophy of I'm going to have the last word. Let's take a look at worldwide. New York Police Department, you can bring it up online, did an outstanding study. And what they found in worldwide, 41% of suspects had a professional or academic relationship with the victim. In other words, they were associated. But pay attention to these next 2 entries because they're important. Their study showed that 49% 58% needed some kind of applied force to stop the violence from continuing. But take a look at that next one. 40% ended in suicide. If you combine the two, that means that 86% of these incidences required some kind of violent act, either at the hands of the person committing the violence or others, to stop this from happening. Also telling is that last entry, 35, is the average suspect age. I don't really have a psychology background per se, but I can tell you those that do have that background point out that at 35, if you follow the adult development theory, that's when males in particular begin to take stock of their failures and their frustrations, and if they lack healthy, adequate coping skills, then they will lash out in violent ways like we're experiencing here. Only 3 in this study, and this was a 10-year study, was the average number of deaths. We have a tendency to think that it's going to be like Virginia Tech, where it's in excess of 30 victims. In reality, 3 is the only average number of deaths. And then, unfortunately, I put a gold medal there. This is primarily a U.S. phenomenon, and this is a trend that's taking place in our country. I think it's been well established since the inception of our country that we've been somewhat of a violent, industrialized society. And during this study period, the United States had 237 incidences compared to 33 worldwide. I really feel that this should get our attention. Let's drill down into healthcare. Those in healthcare know that the Joint Commission issued a Sentinel alert. Those not familiar with healthcare, a Sentinel alert is basically a be on the lookout for this trend, so to speak. They issued that in 2010, noting that healthcare institutions are confronting steadily increasing rates of violent crime. So what does that mean? What is the definition for our discussion this morning? And really, what they found in studying this closer, that violent crime, there's 36 incidences nationwide in 2007, 41 in 2008, a little drop to 33 in 2009. Now, Joint Commission does have a voluntary reporting system, so I think we need to accept the reality that much of what occurs is underreported. That's pretty much established. But during their voluntary reporting system, there were 256 assaults, rapes or homicides of patients and visitors at American Healthcare Centers since 1995, and 110 of those acts occurred after 2007. Just some numbers to crystallize further. 2000 to 2011, 11-year time span, there were 154 shootings at healthcare facilities. Those of you in the business may recall a year and a half ago, for example, the trauma surgeon in Buffalo who shot and killed a nurse who he was having an affair with, lured her into the hallway, shot her, and then later himself committed suicide. Huntington Beach, a year and a half ago, a patient walked in, shot and killed his physician. Same thing happened to a surgeon in Renown Hospital in Reno, Nevada. You'll see there 73 murders occurred, including 20 in hospitals from 1997 to 2009. You can see the rest of the numbers there, but I want to draw your attention to the last there. Those in the business may be familiar with this. 2 per 10,000. What is 2 per 10,000? 2 per 10,000 is the injury rate due to assault in the private sector. So if I work at Nordstrom's, or perhaps I work in a service station or a restaurant, 2 per 10,000 employees is the injury rate due to assault. But I really feel that to the right, that 1 in 20 is very telling. Studies, we all know we can take them or leave them. We want to look at the validity of the study and the sample size and so forth and so on. This was a study done in 2010 that I really find quite remarkable, and physicians find it remarkable as well when I share it with them. A study in 2010 showed that 1 in 20 patients have seriously contemplating killing their physician. I do believe that. I don't know if it's 1 in 20, but certainly the numbers are increasing, and that should get us our attention, and we should begin to prepare response and mitigation strategies. Traditional hospital security is very well established. I'm preparing, though, to visit a brand new facility in San Francisco that is very cutting edge. This facility actually has facial recognition system. When you look at technology especially video and audio capability, what is happening with hospitals, from my perspective, is that they're beginning to mirror what you see in large casinos, like in Vegas. Las Vegas has facial recognition system in many of their casinos to identify cheaters or people who have been banned, and hospitals are beginning to adopt that. So that is a new development I'll share with the group that I just learned about myself a couple of weeks ago. And like I said, I'll go down there and visit that facility shortly. But traditional hospital security, and you can see it up there, access control. But like I said, access control can be defeated. Panic alarms, this is just my professional opinion. There's an over-reliance on panic alarms. I really call it a pacifier and a last resort. It is good for someone to have that if they're in a high-profile position like human resources, perhaps administration, perhaps you're in a corner office on a second floor, you have a tendency to work late at night. That's a good backup to have. The problem is that they're over-relied upon, in my opinion, and in reality, most of the time when you push the button, and I can tell you with our own system, we only have 7. We have 2,500 employees, and yet we only have 7 panic alarms, because once the button is pushed, it's 45 seconds to 2 minutes before the security entity or law enforcement on the other end even gets the signal where it's at, and then you have response time on top of that. So if the folks are relying on panic alarms, it may be misplaced confidence, so I would caution against that. We know that we identify escape routes, evacuation routes, and those types of things. Closed circuit television, we've been really careful to monitor content, especially with children in the area. That's of extreme importance. Crowd control. We know that we're a trauma center here, and to use our own experiences, we'll get large family members arrive in an agitated state. It's an emotional situation. Something has happened to a loved one. Unfortunately, what we experience sometimes is that there are some family members that do have difficulties with coping skills, and they'll turn over garbage cans, perhaps become threatening or assaultive towards staff. I could share with you something that happened in our facility over the weekend. It was in our ICU unit. The adult daughter of a patient approached one of our nurses and asked him if he was going to be the primary nurse for the evening, and he said yes. We had experienced no difficulties up to that point. And what she said to him, she was within 2 feet of him, she said, you know what, if you don't take care of my father correctly tonight, I'm going to get a razor, I'm going to slash your face and slash your tires. So that's an example of some extreme behavior that can happen without warning at times. Crowd control again, if you have a shooting victim come into the facility, and especially if it's a gang member. As I mentioned, we have a significant gang problem here in Fairfield. We had, last month we had 15 gang members arrive after a shooting that unfortunately the victim was dead on arrival. These 15 gang members began to fight in our parking lot, and that can pose some issues as well. And in addition to that, obviously it hurts the organizational image and the patient experience, which we're all trying to strive to attain a high level on. TV channels, I already mentioned that, excuse me. We do a lot of drills here. We'll talk some more about that. We have visible security. There's intrusion detection, data protection, we know. There's secondary barriers such as bollards and those types of things. I'll show you a picture of a barrier that we have here, greeter enclosures. And then we developed, it's common in some hospitals, not a lot, security safety attendants. If we have a patient who has been harmful to staff or made threats, or perhaps they're harm to themselves, they're a suicidal risk, then we'll put instead of a CNA, certified nursing assistant, we'll put a security safety attendant on them. We put them in a low-key uniform, which is designed to be calming as best as it can be, but yet identify the employee as to who they are as far as security. I will say this, despite the picture that I'm painting, we have had one nurse in the last 4 years. We see about 170 patients a day. As noted, we're in a crime problem crime community, and then there's some nearby, Richmond. Some of you may be familiar with that. Back there, Vallejo is another community where there's a lot of gang violence and a lot of shootings. And despite all that, we had one nurse in the last 4 years suffer a very minor injury. That's it, and it's because of these strategies that we've put in place. Programs such as See It, Report It. We have a program here. We've declared a no denial zone. I'll talk about that in a moment. But all these serve, the message I want to convey to you this morning is that all these serve as well-intentioned secondary barriers. The problem is when somebody is intent on coming into our facility to do harm on a wide-scale basis, the ship has already set sail. And chances are we can only react after they've come in, after the facility and our work environment has been compromised. So it's important for us to understand that we have to push the curtilage of safety beyond the facility, and human behavioral threat assessment allows that. Just to touch briefly on some other strategies that are being used, especially in inner cities, ballistic glass or bulletproof glass, metal detectors are being used. We don't have that here at this point. Some hospitals are using canines. I'll do an editorial on that. I'm very familiar with canines given the background I came from in law enforcement. I supervised a canine program. Canines have a very limited use. In case anybody wants to float this or talk about this, basically canines are used as an intimidation prevention tool. They're used as a bite tool to stop an assault. They can be used as a tracking device. They can, as a sniffing device as far as discovery of drugs or a bomb. And they do serve as a deterrent. But that all being said, my position is I would not be comfortable with a canine in a hospital environment, but some organizations have gone to that. Let's talk about armed security. The best data that I have available is 8% of the hospitals in the country have armed security. There are 2 hospitals that I'm aware of in the United States, and North Bay is one of them, that has armed plainclothes security. So at both of our hospitals, we have one armed plainclothes security who is highly skilled. Some of them are retired law enforcement, and they're posted in our emergency department 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Police deputies having a good relationship with those folks and being able to speak that language. If you can get a police department to adopt your hospital, i.e. anytime there's an issue in the hospital, you call a specific officer or deputy, that can be really helpful in getting intelligence information. An example I can pass on to you for that was because we enjoy that kind of relationship with Fairfield Police Department in particular, they did come to us about 1 month ago and said that they had very confidential information that 3 individuals wanted for a murder were going to be visiting a patient that we had in the hospital who had been shot a few days prior. So we were able to put, appropriate security in place, and sure enough, that night, the primary murder suspect showed up and was taken into custody. So that's an example of the fruits that can be gained from establishing an excellent relationship with law enforcement. It's not about the arrest or that they were taken out of the community. The fact of the matter is that most of these people are armed and they're coming into our facility. Not only do we have to worry about something intentionally happened, but we have to worry about something accidentally happened too. Those who have worked in a hospital know that they've seen plenty of accidental discharge victims come into the facility. So it's very problematic. Some other non-traditional tools, defensive weapons. To be candid, I'm not in favor of pepper spray. Some hospitals are beginning to transition to tasers. If there's a question on that, I am very knowledgeable in that area. The police department I work for was the first one in the county we were in outside of San Francisco to bring tasers on board. There's still some misunderstanding, misconceptions about tasers or electronic stun devices, and I'm more than happy to talk about that if we want to. You'll see there a picture. That's our enclosed greeter in our emergency department area in Fairfield. We also have one at Vacaville. That's ballistic glass. The price for that in this area is roughly $35,000 for what you see there. I know that creates image concern. From a security standpoint, is it necessary? I told the organization that my opinion is that it was not necessary, but they value employee safety so much that they felt that we needed to take that step. And then we have 2 hospitals, so once you do one, of course you have to do it for the other there. There are advantages to that. Image-wise, I believe that our population in this country and our respective communities, for the most part, are used to seeing that kind of visible tool that represents the organization. They certainly see it in most banks that they go into, and loan businesses and those types of things. So I think it's probably a sad comment, but I feel that most people are accustomed to seeing that, so it doesn't really register with them. But that serves as an example of what we've done here. I want to talk for a moment, before we get into the human behavioral aspect, really what it means to be security excellence. To be candid, I knew nothing about hospital security when I came here in 2011. I didn't really know what to expect. I've come to find that many hospitals contract out, and that produces a lot of problems. It produces inconsistent performance, a confusion as to what the rules of engagement are. And I'll just tell you what I found when I came here, that there was a lot of, I think, correct perception, but a lot of incorrect perception on the quality of security here. But that being said, they were viewed as basically hands-off, call 911 and basically observe and report. It is my opinion that in hospitals today, we can no longer have that luxury. And after the first year, I jettisoned those contracts, and the organization, based on a staff report that I did, approved the hiring of armed and plainclothes and uniform unarmed security officers. We now number roughly 55 security officers, and the bullets you see before you have really been the culmination of a 3-year process, because there's a lot of misconceptions, and you have to prove yourself, as you should, especially to clinicians here. And we've really established a professional approach. I'm pleased to say that we're viewed as a critical asset. Now, if you can say this about your security team, then that's fantastic. We're just catching up to you. We're part of the family here. We have pride. We're viewed with respect, and I have a little thing I'll show you here in a moment. We're dedicated simply to staff safety. We do the team approach, and I constantly emphasize that we're both leaders and partners. There are 37 dimensions that we evaluate for trend analysis and the performance of our security team. Everything is documented, and because of that, we have early identification of trends, and then we can introduce mitigation strategies as those trends begin to develop and before they get out of hand. So this is an example of something that we use at North Bay that you may find could be of use. We've identified our core services, which is staff safety, security officer safety, patient visitor safety, property protection or asset protection, and then our service field categories. Those are the 37 dimensions that we measure that I spoke about. But then we also identified our fundamental services that we need to make time for. They're important, but they're not really part of our core services, and that is training, our security safety attendant program that I already alluded to, doing our incident reports, providing report writing training, and a visible deterrent. By the way, I will share, we developed our own self-defense program that we have now taught to several hundred nurses. We're quite proud of it. I know there are a lot of self-defense programs out there, Moab being one of them. The feedback that I got when I came here was that they were very complicated and unrealistic, and really shifts the defense for the clinician and the patient and others in the area to the nurse. We've adopted an opposite model where it's advanced communication and security is present. But that being said, there could be a situation where a clinician is taken by surprise, or any employee for that matter. So we developed a very simple yet effective school program called Block, Talk, and Walk. We just taught some 30 staff members yesterday. It's 3 very simple techniques that allows a clinician to block, talk their way out of a situation while walking out of that environment. And it has been very well received here. The biggest surprise for me is that staff really feel empowered and confident, and it's easily retainable. The Moab stuff is an example. Some of it is 16 hours long. It's a blast type format where you're given a lot of information. Self-defense is a perishable skill, so that's why we reduced it down to Block, Talk, and Walk, and it's been very well received. So this slide serves as an example of our fundamental services: desirable, podium watch, lost and found. Again, we will take care of that stuff, but in the scheme of things, it's a desirable service that we provide in our organization here. So let's talk about violence. Let's move into why we're here this morning, and let's talk about human behavioral threat assessment. Why are these things happening in our country? And the intent is emotion-based. There's a lot of definitions out there. I prefer to use the one by the Department of Homeland Security that you see there: an individual actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill in a confined and populated area. Some kind of immediate action is required to stop this incident from continuing. I really view and I feel that our medical services entities in this country need to focus more on human behavioral threat assessment as the first line of defense, especially for an active shooter event or any other kind of violence. Unfortunately, it's misunderstood often. There's not a lot of people skilled in it readily available, and it's overlooked. It provides a very discreet method for gathering important information. I monitor social networking sites. There's a lot of network sites available now where you can get criminal arrest history on somebody, and that provides another piece to the puzzle that it can be very helpful. But this is the most important thing I want to leave you with today. It shifts the decision point to earlier in the process. It's really too late if an assault or some kind of violent incident involving a weapon is occurring. What this allows us to do is shift the point, earlier detection, and then introduce mitigation strategies in advance of the event where we can control the environment better. For the best example I can give you, about a year and a half ago, we had a nurse overhear a patient husband the night before. It was about 5 minutes to 9 p.m. And she overheard the patient's husband say, "You know what, if they don't start taking care of you better, I'm going to come back tomorrow with my gun." And that's a concerning threat. Okay, unfortunately, things get busy. People get sidetracked. Maybe they get confused on what they should do. And that was not reported to me until the following morning, 5 minutes before this individual came. And this individual had, in fact, brought his firearm. If I had the information the night before, we could have done a variety of things. I could have brought in extra security. We could have limited visitation. We probably would have sent law enforcement out to his house. As time for his arrival got closer, if all those had failed, we could have confronted him in the parking lot at that point. But instead, we're forced to interact with the situation within minutes in the hallway where there's a lot of people present. So that's just kind of an example where you can get strategically time on your side. The more time you have on your side, the more thoughtful process you can have and the greater chance of mitigating this situation. And of course, it allows for educated decision making and response. And we want to avoid overreaction and underreaction. But I'll talk about the menu approach, and that prevents that from happening. So as far as human behavioral threat assessment, it's based on an active communication network. We've declared a no denial zone. I teach every 30 days new employees. They range anywhere from 30 to 50 staff. And what I teach them is what we call it here is the OO approach to safety. When you hear or see something that makes you as a human being go, oh, then we want you to report that. And we've been very successful with that. And what I tell people here is that nature gave us a great survival tool. It's our gut instinct. It's our intuition. Something's not quite right here. But nature, unfortunately, from my perspective, played a trick on us, and it gave us a much more powerful tool, and that's denial. I don't want to get somebody in trouble. Maybe they were just joking. Maybe I didn't quite hear it right. Or I reported something once before and it turned out to be nothing. So we've done a really good job of ridding the organization of denial through declaring a no-denial zone officially, supported by the administration, and then also, like I said here, the OO approach. We're looking for leakage in advance of the event or a triggering event. That could be a layoff, it could be a termination, it could be somebody's made a threat, for example. And then it's a team effort approach from there, and then the menu approach, which I'm going to talk about. So I monitor social networking sites. I go on Craigslist, rants and raves, type in North Bay Healthcare, and see if something comes up. Occasionally you will find something, but basically it's the internal network. I will tell you that in the last 2 months, 12 out of the 13 human behavioral threat assessments I've conducted involve staff. And it's the significant other of staff. The relationship is dissolving, and the significant other has made threats to come to the organization. One of them, for example, was very graphic. The employee shared texts with me where this individual said, very specific, I'm saying goodbye to my children, I'm getting my gun, I'm going to come down to North Bay and I'm going to start shooting people. That needs to get our attention. We need to discover it first, though, and we can't discover it and therefore do the first line of defense until we have the infrastructure in place for staff to reach out and communicate those concerns. And I'll talk about handling victims in those types of situations in a moment. So collaboration, I stole this from the federal government. Don't report me. Collaboration equals detection. It's really about identification, and I'll show you another graphic in a moment. Notification, evaluation, and then intervention, and then we have to have documentation. This is critical. All our security officers go through some very intensive report writing training, and then that way we're in the best position to prevent multiple casualty violence. We're very fortunate here to have the unique model in the event somebody were to come in to get through our initial defenses and come in and do some harm, like an active shooter event. We are very fortunate in that we have the best response strategy that's going to occur within seconds to minimize the horror that could happen, basically. This is something that I put together that speaks to hospitals specifically. We want to develop a support network for the victim. It may involve police. Mental health is important. Obviously, security. Other staff. We share things on a need-to-know basis. We do regular security alert bulletins, but it's shared on a need-to-know basis, and we want to strike the proper balance between victim embarrassment, because some of this can be embarrassing, and the safety of the victim and their coworkers. I provide weekly updates to administration on what we're doing, and then HR is going to want to be involved as well. So that's basically our team here at North Bay that are all designed to support the victim. So the foundation for human behavioral threat assessment and violence prevention is an early detection system, communication, comprehensive assessments. I write every report out and evaluate it carefully, and then we make decisions on what to do, because we need to have a scalable strategic plan. This is critical. This is one of the reasons why I'm here, because I think it's important for healthcare to understand and to kind of demystify human behavioral threat assessment. Informational material on workplace violence is critical. This is how we can market it. And like I said, I speak on this at least once a month, but in reality, I attend a lot of staff meetings. I'm preparing an article right now about the importance in the security field of credibility, because credibility equals trust. Trust equals comfort. even when something may be happening outside or we see a patient get aggressive, there's confidence in knowing that the security team is there, will respond appropriately and protect that staff member. There's a big difference, so to speak, I'll give you this metaphor, than a home being broken into on your block. It's kind of close to home. It gets our attention. It's concerning. But there's a difference between that and our home being broken into. So it really is important to get that message across in a credible way and to execute properly. We do a lot of training for personnel. We strike the proper balance between awareness and paranoia, and then the no denial zone I already spoke about. There are some roadblocks, lack of timely communication that you're going to have to overcome, and misunderstanding. Denial equals fear. There's a tendency to want to sometimes put our head in the sand and hope that it will pass over. Unfortunately, this is the new norm, and it saddens me to say that, but we have to come to grips with it. Victim reaction and rationalization. What I hear most common is, well, he does that when he loses his temper. Okay, has he ever hit you before? Well, yes, but, he promised not to do it again. We have to overcome those natural, fearful victim reactions by being sensitive. I could tell you the most powerful tool that I found, and I can say it here, is that number one, we're going to protect your privacy. We're going to strike the proper balance. That's where credibility comes into play. But I simply tell them the truth. And I can see the stress and concern and fear melt away physically from their face and their body. Because rightly or wrongly, the most powerful tool that I found is that what I simply tell them is that you're here this week, last week was somebody else, and next week will be another person. So there's a tendency for victims to think that it's just them and it's going to be front page news, so to speak, and that they're isolated and this doesn't happen to anybody else. But in reality, it does. So I found that to be a very effective tool in calming people down. And then I'll show you the menu approach here in a moment and how they can begin to take control of their situation. I already talked about this. I jumped ahead a little bit. Working with social services, case management, follow-up. We want to stay in touch. I get phone calls 24/7. Your security director needs to understand what's at stake and make themselves available in that manner, because you can be a very calming resource for the employee and the organization. And we know that an employee who is focused wants to continue to work in the organization. They're less likely to make mistakes. So let's look at some danger signs real quick here. And we recognize Cho on the left from Virginia Tech, Harrison Klebold on the right at Columbine. Very sad situations. Let's take a look at leakage. This is what you need to pay attention to. This is what your security team needs to pay attention to. I tell everybody every 30 days when I get before new employees, I tell them, if somebody says to you any of these things, or they say to you, if I were you, I'd call in sick tomorrow, you need to call me right away. But folks, the purpose of this slide is to show you that human beings haven't changed much. So this is an actual case study. No one will think to stop me, as I know everyone. Right or wrong, God will judge me. You don't want to miss anything tonight. God simply made me the instrument of his punishment, so I'm doing holy work now. I don't care about earthly sanctions. I'm in the right. I will be seen as a hero after tonight. Another sign that human behavioral specialists need to pay attention to, self-grandiosing. Those types of things will be the last thing he ever says. The finality of the event. I have control over this individual who I perceive is causing me problems. So what is that event? Okay, those are the statements that John Wilkes Booth made the day that he shot Lincoln. So leakage was happening 200 years ago. In reality, it's been happening for a long time. So we have a tendency to think that some things are new, but in reality, they're not. Here's another example. It's hard to read, but I just want people to die. I'm going to die with them. God betrayed them like he betrayed me. That's another example of leakage. You may see that on a website, or you may see an employee scrawl that on. And that was Aaron Rivera. He used a shotgun in Seattle Pacific University recently to kill 1 and injure 3. We know about Santa Barbara. Perhaps you're aware of it back there, where an individual went on a rampage. He was the son of a producer down there, a movie producer, well known. He was rejected by girls, leaked a lot of information, and then basically went around town shooting people. Some additional signals to pay attention to: an employee is perceived as a loner by others. A supervisor notices writing with disturbing content. You can see it on your screen in front of you. Misses work, not responding to returning calls to family, changing behavior. Threatening content is critical. Speaks of the world closing in on them and expresses little hope. We want to give them a reason to go on. It's my philosophy, and it's shared by others, and I'm still working on our HR here, that if we're going to terminate somebody, we give them a package that calms them down so they don't feel that their world is closing in on them within 24 hours. If we can give them a 30 or 60-day severance, even in a hostile termination type situation, that's a very advantageous strategic tool to use. So what does security want to know? What is it that I want to know? Does the individual have weapons? There's ways to find that out, and your victim, if it's an employee, will tell you that. What is his criminal history, or hers, although 98% of the time we know these are males. Substance abuse, job issues, anger issues, any threats made now or in the past. What motives do they have? I want to go down to the red one, though, for the sake of time. Let's touch on that, coping skills. This is, from my perspective, the number one barrier. Can this person be redirected, and can we tap into their coping skills and reasons to avoid violence, a future job, family, children to live for? Not all of those will be effective 100% of the time, but these are things that we're looking for, that we can bridge this person from the trauma that they're experiencing in their mind now to a future of a little bit more stability. I'm going to go through this. Restraining orders are available. Surveillance, these are things that we do here. Arrest if necessary. I've obtained 6 restraining orders in the last 3 years against patients here, and one staff member. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But you can see there for yourself some of the things that we do here. But I want to get into the menu approach, and this will bring us on our last lap in our time together here this morning. What the menu approach does is it proposes mitigation strategies, and this is the most powerful tool of all, folks. It allows the victims, who oftentimes feel they're in a helpless situation, to become empowered and begin to make decisions to control what they believe is an uncontrollable situation. So from a victim health standpoint, it is vitally, we found this to be really important. It has dual capabilities. It helps provide this empowerment, but also it does provide tangible security measures. Direct notification of the suspect's behavior, we'll talk about that, and then legal ramifications. The fact of the matter is we have found the menu approach to provide comfort and reduce fear, and to provide a very important empowerment tool to the victim. So let's go through a case study. You have somebody who reports, you have an employee who reports their significant other or a patient has made threats. So we have a little menu. We go right through it with the victim, and we don't offer them soup and salad, but we offer them strategies. And so phase 1 is, and the victim will select these strategies with us. So we'll distribute a photograph and other information of this person who's making the threats to selected personnel. That may be your greeter. That may be the security team. It may be the nursing station. It may be administration. It may be environmental services, or the entire organization. It just depends. There have been one incident where we notified the entire organization, and I'll share that with you momentarily. CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design, very important. So we assess their work location. Professor Chicoya, to take you back to that video, we actually did an assessment on his house and gave him travel strategies because he traveled all over. Maintain contact with the victim. Do we need some occupational health intervention? Some coaching in that area. Monitor and review weekly, daily social networking sites. So that's phase 1. So if we feel that we've got an event, but it's not really on our radar screen significantly, we'll go through this with the victim and we'll begin with these strategies. But let's say it's more serious or it continues. Well, then we're going to go to phase 2 of the menu approach. We're going to notify the suspect to cease communication, have law enforcement agency contact directly, notify other police departments for situational awareness, especially if they live in another community, or maybe we want police to give drive-by checks of the victim's house. We want to expand organization awareness and provide an escort to and from their vehicle. These are employees. But let's say it's significant. Then we'll sit down with the victim and we'll work with them. We may file a restraining order, hire private security both at work and home. That's more generic. We have security here. We know that. We want to relocate, perhaps relocate offices to reduce vulnerability, and then we're going to improve the physical security both at home and at work. That's basically all eyes are on the situation, and we're doing everything that we possibly can. So that's the 3 steps for the menu approach. The case study, we already talked about Professor Chakoya. I'll share with you that we had it's public information. We had a very prominent surgeon here 3 years ago that unfortunately began to exhibit some emotional distress, some unusual behaviors, very confrontational, argumentative, would arrive at all hours of the day, began to stalk some people, and it started to get a lot of publicity, unfortunately. He threatened me, so he was discharged from the organization, and unfortunately we had to get a restraining order, as well as some significant others that he had got restraining orders as well. And sadly and unfortunately, while those intervention strategies protected those involved in the organization, unfortunately this physician ended up going to jail, and I believe is still in custody. So that's an example of some of the things that happen. Do your homework. I know we're getting short on time. I'm going to wrap right now. You can see there, do your background check. We all recognize Mike Tyson there. And here's the payoff, folks. Execution equals credibility. Credibility equals trust. Trust equals perception. Perception equals confidence. Confidence equals safety. We actually used our safe environment here as a recruitment tool. It's been cited as a retention tool. We have basically no workers' comp injuries due to assault to our clinicians. We've got a few to security, but basically none. And then we have a reduction in claims as well. That's it for me. I've never talked so much in my life. Hopefully I'll be able to hear anybody, but that's it. And feel free to contact me later if you wish to talk.
Okay, thank you, Rich.